Welcome into Boxing Scene Today here at the Pro Box TV studios. Well, want to make me feel old? Talk about the subject we're talking about right now. 25 years ago this week, Oscar De La Hoya, Shane Mosley won. Pardon me as I take my heart pills because I've been around way too long, but an historic fight with two legends of the sport, Hall of Famers. We look back on that one this week. Jimmy Smith alongside the champs, Chris Algieri, Paulie Malignaggi. So I'm going to date myself here. Of course, I saw this fight live. It was absolutely huge. Shane Mosley, a great amateur in Southern California where I'm from, alongside Oscar De La Hoya, but a guy who never got the recognition he was really due until he faced off with De La Hoya and won that first fight. It was coming off, of course, the loss for De La Hoya from Felix Trinidad. He'd beaten one guy in between, if I'm remembering correctly. Wasn't a huge fight, but the idea, Chris, that De La Hoya still felt the sting of I ran against Trinidad. I'm not running against this guy. It was shades almost of Sugar Ray Leonard saying he would fight Roberto Duran flat-footed in the first fight. He fought flat-footed against Shane, ended up losing a very, very entertaining fight. What do you remember about it?
I actually think De La Hoya had PTSD from that fight for the rest of his career. He never really fought that same, he's always worried about what I think he always kind of worried what the fan and the media thought about him, but after the Trinidad fight, he got raked over the coals for giving up the second half of the fight because he looked brilliant. Absolutely brilliant for the first 6 rounds against Trinidad. Yeah. I mean, the way that he was bouncing, moving, firing combinations, throwing body shots, climbing the body, finishing with the double jab upstairs. He had Trinidad completely befuddled. And then seemed to run out of gas, tried to fight too cautious at the end. And Trinidad, who reached on marathons in between fights, was a consummate endurance guy, came forward and just kept swinging that left hook, kept using that jab, kept boxing very, very smart, putting a lot of pressure. De La Hoya seemed to wilt. And tried to box cautiously because he thought he had it in the bag, or at least that's what he was being told in his corner. That's what he thought within his head. And then he doesn't get the decision. We know historically how that went. And then you got Shane Mosley. Shane was a 35-pounder. He was a super 35-pounder, one of the best I've ever seen. I remember the fight with Philip Holiday. I was so blown away because it was such high-level stuff, because Philip Holiday was really good too. A South African fighter. But Shane jumping up to welterweight. De La Hoya is like a smaller guy. I don't need to box this guy. This is a perfect fight for me. So I don't have to be the mover that everybody was getting on my backside against Trinidad. I can walk this guy down. I can go back to being what I used to be when I was at 35, starching these guys. He was an absolute machine at 35. Actually, under 147, De La Hoya was a killer. I mean, he was just blowing guys out. Those 2 fights against Chavez were ridiculous. How dominating, how powerful, how fast he looked. He probably just thought that was going to be the same thing. Yeah, Shane's fast. Yeah, but he's smaller, whatever. Yeah, but Shane was built out of something else. He jumped those weight classes like no one I've ever seen. He came in, he looked big, he looked fast, he looked strong, he looked durable. He was durable. Shane actually turned out to have a really good chin, but it was found out then. This fight broke my heart, man. I'm the youngest one here. I was 16. I was a junior in high school watching it at my best friend's house. And I was a huge De La Hoya fan in the 90s, which I think everybody who pays attention to anything I talk about knows that. But I was really upset about this fight. And listen, Shane won the fight. He won the fight. Very, very close. 7-5, but he won the fight.
Yeah. Your thought on it, and to Chris' point, what it did to De La Hoya, because this was the first fight where he started getting that can't win the big one tag. He didn't have that really before this fight at all. It started kind of grumbling.
That was I think also just media grumblings. De La Hoya had already.
But it started with this one.
Had already won some because it was 2 losses, right? But he had won. He had won the Quartet fight by this point. He'd won some big fights already.
Pernell Whitaker, right?
Yeah, Whitaker.
All Chavez fights were huge, and an older Chavez.
Listen, every fight at that point was a De La Hoya fight, was a big fight. But I'll tell you what, I for context, I was a little older than Chris and a little younger than you, right? But I can remember the grumblings after the Trinidad fight, like, and it was also about, does he have the heart? He doesn't really have that Mexican heart. He ran for it. He's a Mexican warrior, stands his ground. Fights, yep. And it was. You can see in the way Oscar chose to fight the fight. I think he even rehired Robert Alcazar from his amateur days to, come back into the team. Because remember, De La Hoya used to go through different trainers as well. And I think that also played a part in, he wanted to go back to his roots. Like, let me hold my ground. Let me do the Mexican warrior thing because, I'm getting raked over the coals. Like I said, I think he had the win over Darryl Coley in between. Yep. It might have been on these. I bet it been an East Coast fight. Or I don't know.
It was at the Garden. I was actually at that fight.
So it was at New York, yeah.
De La Hoya, sorry. Arturo Gatti knocked out Joey Gamache on that undercard. I was there for that.
Madison Square Garden,
Yep, the Garden.
So the East Coast fight. And that was a fight where he came back. I think he won with a body shot over Coley, if I remember correctly.
Coley was a bit of a stinker, and he had kind of chased him around.
Coley was a capable guy though, but yeah, De La Hoya got to him, DC guy.
Yep.
And then they made the Mosley fight. Mosley looked at as a smaller guy, but you got to also read between the lines here. And I remember, I was an amateur at the time, so I was very familiar with the amateur weight classes and the amateur system because I was an amateur at that time, and I was already a high level amateur at that time. In the amateurs, I think there may have been a rivalry with Mosley and De La Hoya. They may have fought in the amateurs, but more so than that, De La Hoya went to the Olympics at 132 pounds in 1992. Shane fought the Olympic trials in 1992 at 139 pounds. So Shane was a bigger guy in the amateurs, and Shane lost in the trials to Vernon Forrest and didn't make the Olympic team. Vernon made the Olympic team. And
lost him in the pros, too.
Yeah, lost him in the pros later as well.
Twice.
So, and Oscar at 132 pounds made the Olympic team and won the gold medal. So while it was viewed as Oscar being the bigger guy and Shane being the lightweight, he's jumping up and one. You also got to keep in mind the changes that had happened in the 90s that had happened from boxing before. That the weigh-in started to happen the day before in the 90s, as opposed to before that, and around the time of these guys turned pro, as opposed to before that, the weigh-in was in the morning. Shane used to destroy himself to make a lightweight. Shane was a 139-pounder in the amateurs and was a lightweight for a while in the pros as well. So if the weigh-ins had been morning of weigh-ins, probably Shane wouldn't have been a lightweight for very long. So Shane ended up, doing what he had to do to make the lightweight division and become a very dominant lightweight champion. I think he had one of the highest knockout percentages at the time for the champions. I think it was him and Nassim Hamed at the highest knockout percentages as champions.
The amount of muscle he had at 135 was
at that moment in time. I'm just trying to put fans in that moment in time for those of you that were alive and were old enough to remember, you know what I'm talking about. For those of you that are younger, I'm just trying to put the context into the moment, because looking back, there's always a different view in hindsight. But in the moment, this is what it looked like. And it was viewed as, the lightweight coming up to the welterweight division. Oh, the only guy that's done this from lightweight to welterweight is Roberto Duran. I remember they were saying. That was the conversation. The only guy that went from lightweight and skipped 140 and went right to 147 and won a title was Roberto Duran. That's something. That's something else, something special. Something that's not often done. Well, ironically, it was done to me later by Broner, but I didn't think he won the fight. But we'll put that.
We'll leave that over there.
We'll put that over there. In this moment, though, that I'm talking about here, I remember. I think if I remember correctly, Shane had a couple of fights at welterweight. I think he knocked out Willie Wise, and I think he knocked out Wilfredo Rivera.
Yes, Rivera.
Willie Wise had beaten Chavez. And Willie Wise was a Long Island guy, slickster. And then Wilfredo Rivera had been like a fringe contender who Puerto Rican, had also trained in New York for a while.
Strong,
had fought Whitaker, had given Whitaker a tough fight, had gotten beat pretty easily by Oscar, and Shane stopped him.
6 months before was the Willie Wise fight. And then 6 months before that was the Wilfredo Rivera.
Okay, so exactly. I do remember correctly. So he was kind of moving into the welterweight division, but he hadn't had 140-pound fights. He had gone to both of those fights were on 147, and the talk was Oscar's going to be too big. That was the talk. Oscar's going to be too big. And when you watch the fight, why is it entertaining? Why do we remember it so fondly? Because Oscar did fight that way. But look, when you thought about it after, you appreciated the entertainment value that you got out of the fight. You appreciated the entertainment value they got out of the fight. But then you started wondering to yourself, if you knew boxing, was that Oscar's best path to victory? Could Oscar have won if he fought like the De La Hoya who came up the ladder, as opposed to the De La Hoya who, was trying to prove something in the machismo fashion? And that was the thing. And that's why when media says, we don't care about a loss, you fight everybody. Well, like what did they do to Oscar after?
Oh, Shane went.
Raked him over the coals because, he can't win the big one. Yeah, so a loss does affect you.
And also Shane's HBO contract was soaring after that. I mean, he was fighting everybody, knocking everybody out for years to come because of that. And I agree, because that's one thing, if you really watch that fight, Shane was technically the smaller guy coming up, but obviously it wasn't that much smaller. But the difference is hand speed on the inside. De La Hoya stood in front of him, and those looping shots from Shane, the overhand right, that leaping left hook, they were so fast, so quick. If De La Hoya was fighting at range, those punches don't land.
I can remember expressions Jack Mosley was saying. Two expressions that stand vividly in my mind in this fight, and then even Mosley's career, but especially in this fight. They called their boxing power boxing.
Yep.
And I remember wow, it's like, power boxing. That sounds cool. Like, you know, like, and I
want to do that.
And I'm an amateur, but it's like, you know, what would you describe power boxing? You know, like, oh, this is power boxing. You're watching Shane. It's like, that's. And then I remember the other expression they kept saying constantly. You heard him in the corner. Off rhythm. Jack telling Mosley to get back on that rhythm. Off rhythm. And I remember those two distinct things just being the sort of the description of the fight for Jack and Shane Mosley in terms of the way they game planned it and the way they approached that fight, and they stuck out of my mind. I mean, to this day, when I think about that fight, I think about those expressions: off rhythm and power boxing.
Well, when you think about the division at the time in 2000, before we were on camera, because we're always talking about boxing anyway, Chris, we were just sitting there freestyling. We came up with 6 or 7 Hall of Famers, right, from that era. I mean, depending on how you want to define that era. I mean, we just talked about Vernon Forrest. We also talked about Ike Quartey. Mm-hmm. We talked about Felix Trinidad. We talked about Pernell Whitaker being still a factor in that time in history. 47 was absolutely monstrous.
Yeah, and in the current era of 47, how we keep talking about, 47 is normally like the jewel of the sport, and we have a kind of a barren division right now.
Yep.
Guy like Obakar today is a world champion. Yeah. Obakar could fight. Man, he could really fight. He fought all those guys. Yeah, you fight Trinidad, you fight De La Hoya. You know,
and he lost all of them.
He lost the Quartey.
He lost the Quartey in a majority decision.
Trinidad
he got stopped by Trinidad.
Stopped by De La Hoya.
8, and he got stopped by De La Hoya late in like 11. But was in all those fights. Even the fights he got stopped. I mean, the guy could really, really fight. That guy.
And he had a K-Swiss commercial, I remember, the sneakers.
So
the guy had big endorsement deals. I remember that. Remember those commercials? K-Swiss, that's what.
How do you be in a division with De La Hoya and you're getting commercials? That's amazing. Yeah. That's amazing. But I mean, what a time. The division was so deep. Ike Quartey was one of my favorite fighters back then. I love it. De La Hoya was my absolute favorite, but like number 2 was De La Hoya. I was not a big fan of Trinidad at the time. I am now, but I wasn't then because he beat a lot of my guys. But yeah, Ike Quartey I loved. De La Hoya was
Fernando
there.
Vargas.
Fernando, I mean, he was around that, in that orbit. He was in that orbit. Pernell Whitaker was still viable, you know. Even Camacho was still in there with those guys.
Camacho I loved.
Yeah.
Trinidad I wasn't a big fan of either. But you know what it was with Trinidad? It wasn't so much the fighter. It was the fighter. Then as you get older, you learn to really appreciate him. You're like, wow, like he really was something.
Late
You know
power.
what it was in that moment when you're in the moment and you can't sort of step out. When you step out, you got older and you matured. You really appreciate Trinidad for so many reasons. But in the moment when you're in there, it's just, dude, his fans are so obnoxious. They were so obnoxious. And it's you begin to dislike the fighter. You're like,
and then you fight Cotto, you got to deal with the same fans.
That was like my karma, right? It's like I end up dealing with the same fan base. And like, God.
The 2 guys the most that I really, in hindsight, really, really respect and probably should have been some of my favorite fighters at the time are Trinidad and Lennox Lewis. I didn't like Lennox Lewis when he was fighting. Now he's one of my favorite heavyweights ever. Trinidad, didn't like him when he was fighting. Now he's one of my favorite welterweights of all time. Like
Lennox, I enjoyed. I gotta say,
Lennox,
I think with Trinidad, it was just at that moment, I felt like the fan base was obnoxious. You know what? It also did it for me.
But he was so respectful.
That's what I'm saying. No, and also as a fighter, he was super entertaining and super great. But you know what it was? What did it for me? I went to Trinidad Whitaker in February 1999. And after the fight, Trinidad breaks his jaw. It's like the end of it's end of Whitaker. You know, he breaks Whitaker's jaw. It was finally a fight where you saw Whitaker's level had dropped to where he was no longer losing competitive fights anymore. Now it was like non-competitive. And I remember Trinidad Whitaker at the end of the fight after the decision going up on the ropes to salute the crowd like maybe this is it. And they booed him. And I was like, these people are so obnoxious. They're so cringe. And I was like, it made me just dislike them, And obviously I'm an 18-year-old kid at the time. Later on, you appreciate the fighter. You appreciate a lot of things. Now I've even met Trinidad, obviously, super fan of his. But in the moment, it was like,
for me, I was a young kid, and I was just mad he was beating my heroes. He beat De La Hoya, he beat Whitaker, he beat Fernando Vargas, he beat David Reed. I love David Reed. He beat David Reed up. Like I was just like, oh, this guy's beating all my guys.
I remember him with the 3 gold medal winners, right? When he beat De La Hoya, Reed,
and Vargas.
And Vargas.
What did he beat? Pernell, Oscar, and Reed.
Mm-hmm.
Which is 84, 92, 96.
Yeah.
Which is unbelievable when you think about that. I remember when he fought Fernando Vargas, and it looked like in that final knockout that that Vargas got shot by a sniper somewhere
from
on
the rafters.
stands.
Yeah.
That, and I remember going, oh my God.
That was another super fight.
That was one of the most
fight.
incredible displays of heart I've ever seen in my life from Vargas.
Not just that. I mean, he almost came back and won the fight.
And it was,
Yeah.
It was like,
Yeah.
it was such
Incredible.
it was such a good fight. That was, you think about old school throwback fights that you don't see.
I've
like
probably
this,
watched
where,
that fight a dozen
where guys get paid too much money now and they just don't fight with their heart, or they don't make the fight in their primes anymore. They make the fights when they've made a ton of money, so neither guy's that hungry to willing to go for it and put themselves in the risk of being hit with a gunshot like that. You know what I'm saying? Like, guys, those were the throwback old school fights. Guys fought in their primes. They didn't wait to stack the bags and then, okay, now we'll fight.
We didn't let it marinate for a decade.
Yeah, well, we won't have to take any chances anymore. Now we'll kind of tango because we made a bunch of money. Let's just give the fans what they want. It's our names that are going to sell the fight. Dude, that was an old school throwback fight, man. That was like you're putting yourself, you're bringing your big guns and you're shooting. You know what I mean? Like, that was some fight, and that was the mentality of the fighters back then.
Hey,
that's why
gunslingers get shot.
Yeah, and that's why Oscar and Shane fought at the moment. They fought too. It's like Shane didn't cherry pick around and say, okay, let me maneuver my way up slowly. These guys are pretty dangerous. Let me get myself set up in this way. Nah, bro, he went right
to him,
right to the big guns,
and then fought the rematch of 54.
Yeah,
which obviously is going to help the money man De La Hoya, and you still beats him. Yeah, Shane had big balls.
Vernon, who nobody wanted to fight.
Yeah,
fought
twice.
Winky, who nobody wanted to fight.
Margarito, nobody wanted.
Yeah.
Dude, they thought he was going to get killed by Margarito. Of course, the hand wrap situation. That's another
What
show.
about Nazim Richardson? Nazim
Brother
Richardson got
Nazim
underrated
Richardson,
because he caught the Trinidad hand wrap in the Hopkins fight, and then he caught the Margarito hand wrap in the Shane Mosley fight.
He knew what to look for.
Nazim with the hand wrap was like Sherlock Holmes when he was watching the hand wraps. He was something else. Because how many guys watched those guys get hand wrapped from the opposite camp
and weren't paying attention?
Didn't pay attention enough, or didn't really think to bother or anything. Because we've all been in locker rooms where the other guy's team member has to come in and they get to watch your hands.
Honestly,
Half the time they're just conversating with your trainer. Like, I would always have my headphones in because I don't want to deal with anybody. I don't want to talk to anybody. But I can remember seeing, even if I don't hear what they was doing talking about, they were just chatting with your own trainer. You know what I mean? They all know each other.
That was always really big for me. I always made sure that I had someone that I trusted in my team to make sure that the hand wraps are done well. Because I come from kickboxing. Mm-hmm. That was
notorious, by the way, in kickboxing.
Yes.
Loaded wraps.
Oh,
notorious.
yeah. Loaded wraps, skinning gloves. Yeah.
Really?
Very, very common. So
Skinning gloves is such a big.
That's something that I was really aware of coming up, even for my teenage years. So that was something like our team. My team was a bunch of kickboxing coaches anyway. We were really big about watching gloves getting wrapped because it's very easy to tamper with in kickboxing because there was no security. Nobody cared. It was the Wild Wild West.
And by the way, guys at home, if you don't know what skinning gloves is when you tie the glove and when you make that first knot and you tighten it, instead of tying the glove here at the wrist, you tie it here. So then when you pull it, it pulls all the padding back. The skin. Like, it's only when you
makes it tight.
So you make you basically tie it here at the middle of the hand, and then you pull it and it goes, and the glove basically goes over your knuckle tighter. So that's called skinning the glove, as opposed to the rope, the ties are here on the glove, the strings are here, and you tie it at your wrist and pull it at your wrist. There's no skinning, but when you tie it up here and then pull it back, it takes the skin back, so it makes it tighter over your knuckles. That's called skinning the gloves. Technically, it's illegal. You try to get away with it even as little as you can.
And guys, gloves are not nice. They're leather. So and you make that real tight and you pull that padding
also
back.
Very thin. Like an 8-ounce glove is very.
Oh yeah,
very
they're
small.
The knuckles go right through that. People don't understand. Like, oh, he's got gloves on. Yeah, no, you're hitting with bones. Yeah, and you can feel those bones through.
And the glove is to protect the hand. It's not to
it's
protect.
not. So you can punch harder. It's so you can punch harder, not so you can protect somebody's chin.
Our next time, by the way, when it comes to our boxing history, maybe the Margarito fight and the effect it had on boxing history. But this was Sugar Shane Mosley, Oscar De La Hoya. Both fights, by the way, outstanding. They're on YouTube. Check them out. Great boxing history. That's what we bring you. BoxingScene Today, not just news, but history. And as it makes news and as it makes history, you'll see it right here. Tune in. Find out why millions are watching.
Fight of the millennium.